Chapter 16, Follow the Glow. They surrounded her in a tight circle, their faces eerily lit by candlelight. Morgan wanted to scream, to run, to yell for Hawthorne, but she was frozen in fear. We are the witches of the Coven 13. We are the eyes that have seen the unseen. We are the voices of those who don't speak. We will distinguish the bold from the meek. They were 7, but they spoke as one, a mix of young and old, and not a pointed black hat or a warty nose among them. There were long-sleeved black dresses, buttoned all the way up to their necks, with their hair pulled back tightly, and netted black veils overshadowed cruel faces. This, Morgan realized, must be what real witches looked like. She didn't like them much anymore. What do you want? She turned in a circle, scared to take her eyes off any one of them for too long. 2 frights befall you on this All Hallows Eve, they said in unison. 1 to be seen and 1 to believe. Flee if you must, charge if you dare, or follow the glow and you might have a prayer. One of the witches handed Morgan a small ivory envelope. The card inside read, "Welcome to the Fright Trial." Okay, just gonna say this is a bit different than what I thought was happening, so it kind of makes me glad. You may turn back now and withdraw from the Wonder Society entrance trials if you wish. If you continue, we accept no responsibility for the consequences. Choose wisely. Fright Trial, Morgan whispered. She didn't know whether she was relieved or terrified. On one hand, the witches evidently weren't here to boil her in a cauldron or turn her into a newt. On the other hand, what had Jupiter called it? The nervous breakdown trial? Some candidates never recovered? He had been appalled to learn that the new High Council of Elders had reinstated it. Morgan swallowed. Coven 13 stared down at her with cold, dark eyes. We are the witches who will settle your fate, they chanted. We know the terrors and dread that await. Be wise and turn back before it's too late. Or, if you dare, open the gate. The candles blew out as if a gust of wind in the coven disappeared. 2 lights appeared in the darkness. To Morgan's right, the ladder had turned, illuminated by ambient streetlight from the open manhole above. Looking up, she heard the distant celebratory noise of the Black Parade and longed to return to it. Hawthorne, she called hesitantly, are you there? But her friend was gone. Morgan's stomach twisted. Had he gone to find Finn, or was he somewhere else in the midst of his own fright trial? To her left, farther into the darkness, an arched wooden gate stood, half hidden in shadow. A single melted-down candle stub burned dimly above it, inviting her inside. Follow the glow, and you might have a prayer. Morgan desperately wanted to take the ladder, but how could she quit the trials now? She thought of Jupiter and Inspector Flittock and Hawthorne and the Hotel Deucalion, and most of all, she thought about having to face the hunt of smoke and shadow again, as if she was kicked out of Nevermore. Surely nothing in the Fright Trial could be more frightening than that. Scrunching her hands into fists, Morgan hurried herself to push open the gate before she could change her mind. Night air sent a chill down her neck. She was outside again, but not in the alley. A full moon shone above the rolling hills, covered with jagged tombstones, concrete angels, and hulking mausoleums. An engraved stone archway above Morgan's head read, Morden Cemetery. There was no parade float with cardboard headstones and crepe paper trees. It was the real Morden Cemetery, whatever that might be. That was the bad news. The worst news was that, once again, Morgan was not alone. A groan rose from the ground beneath her feet. She was standing on a grave, and the grave had a corpse, and the corpse had a head, and the head was emerging from the sodden earth with an eerie, gasping moan. Morgan screamed, struggling to free itself from the dirt. The corpse grabbed her ankle with one decaying skeletal hand. She fell and tried to claw away on her hands and knees, but the hand kept its grip. There were more. Morgan could hear them all around, rising from their rest. She kicked hard and wildly, clawing at the grass to get away. With one retching kick, she dislodged the zombie's arm from its body and sent its skull flying halfway across the cemetery. I feel like this could give you nightmares, so if you need to stop listening, it's okay. She stumbled to her feet and, feeling a wave of revulsion, pulled off the disembodied hand that still gripped her ankle. Ugh, disgusting, she muttered, wiping remnants of glistening gray flesh away from her hands. There were dozens now, coming fast like a tidal wave, and their hungry white eyes fixed on Morgan. Skin and muscle hung loose, rotting on their bones, burial clothes all shredded with graying with age. They were nothing like costume zombies on the black parade float, with their artfully torn clothes and caked green makeup. They were the rising dead, and they were coming for her. A curly-haired, gangly-limbed storm of fist and fame tore through the horde, screaming itself hoarse. The corpses stumbled away, if not in fear, then at least in mild alarm. Take that, death breath. Hawthorne's clothes were torn, and he had leaves of bits of twigs tangled in his hair. He held a burning torch with both hands and swung it at the zombies in wild, haphazard blows. Morgan had to duck to avoid getting a face full of embers, but it seemed to keep the dead at bay. Where have you been? She'd never been so happy to see anyone in her life. Me? Said Hawthorne. Where have you been? I was shouting for you and I tried to climb down, and then the alley went dark and these witches showed up. Coven 13, I met them too, and they were awful. They said they were going to. 2 frights each, I know. His eyes wide as dinner plates, Hawthorne lunged forward and swept the torch back and forth like a sword. Whoosh, whoosh. The dead kept crawling from their graves like rats from a sewer. Morgan shuddered. How do we get out? No idea. Whoosh. How'd you get in here? Don't know. It was like a tunnel at one end. I could see the black parade, and at the other end there was just this candle, and I knew if I went back to the parade, whoosh, 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 I'd be kicked out of the trial, so I just followed the glow. Morgan gasped, grabbing his shoulder. Hawthorne, the candle, follow the glow. That's what the witches said. I followed a candle through the great gate, and they're getting closer. Hawthorne shuddered breathlessly, still singing whoosh, whoosh. Let's make a run for it. Whoosh. And how exactly? Will you be careful? Morgan ducked again, narrowly missing a torch to the head. Where'd you get that thing? It was hanging outside of a crypt. Up there beneath. Hawthorne trailed off, his eyes suddenly alight. Morgan followed his gaze to a marble tomb, the biggest of the cemetery, at top of a gently sloping hill. Beneath an angel, the angel statue above a crypt. It was holding a candle. I'm sure it was. Morgan's heart leapt with a giddy mix of hope and fear as he bolted across the cemetery. Follow the glow and you might have a prayer. Angel, prayer. It was a clue. If there was any way out of this, she thought, it must be through that crypt. They were either about to escape this nightmare or be trapped inside a fancy marble box with an undead army battering down the door. Hawthorne led the way, using the torch to beat a path through their attackers, like an explorer hacking through thick jungle with a machete. The zombies ducked and stumbled, melting away from their fire and fear. There was a flicker of light at the crest of the hill, a small glowing beacon drawing them onward. They were going to make it. The crypt was close. It was so close. It was locked, puffed Hawthorne as he dropped the torch, pulling the iron door with all his might. Morgan joined in, but even with their combined strength, the door wouldn't budge. A renewed chorus of groans rose up behind them, the rasping scrape of flesh and bone dragging across marbled ground as if the unhappy residents of Morden's cemetery closed in. Hawthorne snatched up the torch again, and in his panic swung a bit too enthusiastically. With one last arching whoosh through the air, the flame blew out. That's it, said Morgan. We're done. In despair, she lifted her face to the statue above the crypt. The angel looked down mockingly, a melted down candle stub in its pudgy angel hand. But wait, Morgan blinked. The angel's other hand was pointed to the ground on their left, at a freshly dug, unfilled open grave, a 6-foot deep hole in the ground. A new variety of dread crept into Morgan's bones. Hawthorne continued to swing his burnt-out torch at the zombie horde, but without the threat of fire, they didn't seem that bothered. At least, desperate in an attempt, he threw the head of a finely dressed corpse, succeeding only in knocking off its top hat. Any other ideas? Just one. Morgan grabbed Hawthorne's arm and started inching toward the grave, one eye on the zombies. Is it a good one? Yes. She lied. It was a terrible lie, truly awful, but it was the only one she had. Are you going to tell me what it is? Nope. Morgan jumped into the grave, pulling Hawthorne down with her. She braced for impact. For the moment, she would land in the dirt at the bottom and realize she made a dreadful mistake. I was about to have her brain chewed by zombies. But that moment didn't come. The two friends fell, screaming all the way through the cold and dark, seemingly forever. And when they finally landed, it was on soft, damp grass. They sat for a moment, catching their breath and grinning stupidly with relief. How? Hawthorne puffed. Did you know that would work? Didn't. Guessed. Good guess. Morgan got up and dusted herself off. They were in the garden courtyard surrounded by 20-foot-tall hedges. Tiny golden lights twinkled among the foliage. At one end of the courtyard, a pond burbled pleasantly. At the opposite end, a tree had dropped its molten red harvest on the ground. To their left, a natural archway in the hedge led to a dark, foggy path. To their right, a golden gate was ajar, shining a beam of pale silvery light into the courtyard. Where are we? Hawthorne asked. The air was richly autumnal. It smelled of rain and chimney smoke and decomposing leaves, of apples and beeswax. The moon seemed brighter, yellower here. It was as if someone had taken the autumn night and turned it up several notches. Everything was just a bit more. One sock weather, murmured Morgan. Hawthorne, I think we're in the Wondrous Society Gardens. Oh, he said, surprised. Is that it then? Did we pass? Not sure. Are we supposed to have 2 frights? Hawthorne screwed up his face. I was hoping the witches counted as 1. Morgan frowned. Was it really going to be that easy? The witches were creepy. She'd be happy never to set foot inside Morden's cemetery again. But even so, she couldn't see why anyone would call this the nervous breakdown trial. Perhaps she had a higher threshold for scariness than most people. It felt safe and peaceful in the courtyard. Morgan was in no rush to leave. Maybe someone was about to come through and congratulate them, to tell them they had gotten to the final trial. Perhaps, Morgan thought, I'll just wait here for a while. She drifted as if in a dream, drawn by the pleasant tinkling sound of the pond. It felt like water itself was beckoning on her, pulling her on like a string. Then she saw it. A golden light on the broken surface of the water. On a stone in the center of the pond sat a single candle, dripping tiny rivers of melted wax into the water. She opened her mouth to call for Hawthorne when, Morgan, look, he shouted from the opposite end of the courtyard. I found it, the next candle. Morgan ran to where he was standing beneath the tree, pointing up to the branches. Sure enough, right at the top of the uppermost branch sat a burned-down candle stub in a pool of molten wax. A quick investigation revealed a 3rd candle melted into the hand of a wooden gate, and a 4th dripping into the grass beneath the shadowy archway. Which are we supposed to follow? Said Morgan. It's obvious, isn't it? Said Hawthorne, looking puzzled. The pond, said Morgan. At the exact moment, Hawthorne said, the apple tree? No, the pond, she insisted. Don't you see? We're supposed to jump in. How can you follow a glow when it's stuck in a tree? Climb it, duh. And what happens when we break our legs on the way down? How could he possibly think they were following the apple tree candle? It was obvious the pond candle was the right one. Morgan could feel it deep inside her bones. It called to her. We can't stay here all night, said Hawthorne. Let's draw straws. We don't have straws. Paper, scissors, rock, then. Morgan groaned. Fine. Are you two completely stupid? Said a voice from the shadows. They followed the sound to the dark-skinned girl sitting on the ground, leaning against the hedge, her legs stretched out. Her long, thick hair was in 2 braids, and she wore flannel pajamas, a bathrobe, and striped woolen socks. The witches of Coven 13 must have pulled her straight out of bed. Morgan felt an unpleasant jolt of recognition. What are you doing here? What do you think? Said Cadence Blackburn, rolling her eyes. Fright Trial, same as you. Morgan squalled. You're a cheat, Cadence. You? The girl's sour expression faltered in surprise, flickered briefly across her face. You remember me? Of course I remember you, said Morgan. You stole my place in the chase trial and my ticket to the Elder's secret dinner. Cadence stared silently, her mouth slightly open. Morgan wondered if she was going to apologize, but she seemed to snap out of it. So, you're here, aren't you? Hope the dinner was worth cheating for, Morgan said resentfully. Suppose you and Elder Quinn are best friends now? No, actually. Cadence stood, pulling her bathrobe tight around her. It was streaked with dirt, and she had 2 twigs and leaves in her hair. Morgan wondered what her first fright had been. If she'd been chased by zombies too, but she couldn't bring herself to ask. You must know it was lousy. Noelle wouldn't shut up about herself. Nobody could get a word in edgewise. The elders barely noticed I was there. Cadence finished abruptly. Morgan was surprised to hear her talk about her friend that way. The girl walked to the edge of the pond. Anyway, have you figured it out yet, idiots? Figured out what? Said Hawthorne. You're not supposed to pick the same one. Cadence made a face as if it was obvious. The others all just ran straight through the arch or climbed over the stupid tree or whatever. You're the only 2 idiots who have decided to draw straws. Others? How many people have been through? Loads. We all got dumped here and everyone goes gaga over the candles. That's part of the test. You're supposed to pick the one you're drawn to, at least. At least that's what I think. Why haven't you gone through then if you're so brilliant? You scared? Of course I'm not scared. Nobody's jumped in the pond yet. They've all gone for the other 3. It's waiting. Morgan groaned. Of course, you were waiting to see what happens. If you don't want to jump in first yourself in case it's something bad, you're a cheat and a coward. Well, I don't care. I'm not afraid. Morgan lied. She stepped over to the edge of the pond, clutching the hem of her dress to stop her hands from shaking. Hawthorne, you climb the tree. I'm jumping in the water. Are you sure you don't? Count of 3. She continued before he could talk her out of it. 1, 3, shouted Cadence and pushed Morgan from behind. Morgan splashed face first into the pond and sank down, down, down until there was no more breath left in her lungs. She kicked and struggled upward, opening her eyes in the dark water. There was no candlelight above. Everything was black. Her lungs burned. She was going to drown. She was going to die. And then, still dark. Dry. Land. Morgan gulped mouthfuls of sweet, cold air into her empty lungs. The ground was bumpy and hard. She struggled to her knees, then stood, staggering slightly as she regained her balance. All was quiet. A cool breeze brushed her neck. Morgan spotted a street sign. She was on the corner of Deacon Street and McCalley Avenue. A single golden gaslight above her head beamed a circle of light around her onto the empty cobbled road, which earlier, was it hours ago, days, had been filled with costume revelers and silly parade boats. Where was Fen? Where was Hawthorne? The street was empty of life. Hello? But there was something, a gentle fluttering. Looking up, Morgan saw a black thing, like a small bat or a large moth. It winged its way down through the glow of the gaslight, quivering on the breeze before landing precisely at her feet. A black envelope with her name on it. She bent to pick it up. Inside was a note. You have failed. They are coming. Get out. Morgan felt all the muscles in her legs tighten, but somehow she couldn't make them move. They are coming. The words echoed in her head. It was over. She failed the Fright Trial. She'd outrun her curse all year long, and it finally had caught up with her. The quiet was shuttered by the bellow of a hunter's horn, the clattering of hooves on cobblestones. The note fell from Morgan's hand, floating to the ground in slow motion and landing with the back facing up. It bore only one word: run. But there was nowhere to run. The hunt and smoke and shadow was suddenly all around her, creeping out of the darkness, swallowing the edges of her circle of light. It shrank, growing dimmer and dimmer. An unexpected voice spoke, somewhere in the back of her head. Shadows are shadows, Miss Crow. They want to be dark. Light, Morgan whispered shakily. Stay in the light. She forced herself to look away from the glowing red eyes of the hunt, to look up, to gaze into the golden lamp above her. She reached up, grabbing hold of the gaslight's metal post, and began to climb. She might have failed the trial. She might be kicked out of Nevermore, but she wouldn't let the hunt take her now. She wouldn't. Stay in the light, she whispered again, feeling stronger, putting one hand in front of the other. Her foot slipped, but she held on for dear life, wrapping her legs around and shinnying up, drawing closer to the light, blocking out the growling wolves below and the sounds of rifles behind cocked. Closer to the light, closer and closer, one hand after another, up one rung and then one more to the top of the ladder, toward the circular light from the manhole above, out of the sewer, up, into the alley, and at last, to safety. Morgan leaned against the alley wall, clutching her breath and gazing into the street beyond. There it was, all the life and color of the black parade, as if she had never left it. The hunt of smoke and shadow was nowhere to be seen. Her nightmare had ended. She sighed and closed her eyes. It had all been part of the Fright Trial. She was relieved. She could have cried. "I don't need legs to fight you," came Hawthorne's frenzied voice. Morgan opened her eyes to see him crawling up from the sewer, using only his upper body. "Come back here, you coward. I'll fight you legless." "Hawthorne," Morgan yelled, jumping to meet him out of the manhole. "Hawthorne, it's not real. The trial's over. You've got legs." Hawthorne stopped flailing, but still breathed heavily, his eyes darting left and right, as if searching for his opponent. After a moment, he looked down and seemed to come to himself, patting his legs all the way down to his toes. I've got legs! I've got legs!" Dragon bit him off. He was smiling, but his face was still light. "Big, ugly thing." So you were going to fight a dragon?" she said, "legless?" Before Hawthorne could respond, the night went dark and silent again, as if all the noise and light of the black parade had been swallowed up, as if the moon itself had gone dark. A match was struck in the darkness, and suddenly Morgan and Hawthorne were surrounded by the veiled, candlelit faces of the Coven 13. Hawthorne dug his fingernails into his arm. "I thought it was over," he whispered. "So did I," she whispered back. Their 7 voices rose as one. "We are the witches of Coven 13, Abigail, Amity, Stella, Nadine, Zoe, Rosaria, sweet Mother Nell. That's the old bat who pretended she fell. You must have been chosen, young Swift and young Crow. You will proceed to the trial of show. Your courage and daring while facing in fright have served you both well on this Hallowmas night. So go with our blessing, go without fuss, and enjoy 10% off at Cauldrons R Us." The witches handed them each a voucher for Magic Supply Shop and an ivory envelope inside, which was an invitation to the final trial, the show trial, to take place in the Trolliseum Arena on the 5th Saturday in Winter of One. The Coven 13 blew out their candles and disappeared. The sights and sounds of the parade returned slowly, rising up around them as if someone were turning a dial, and finally, the Fright Trial was truly over. Morgan's legs had turned to jelly. She'd done it. She'd made it through the first 3 trials, as Jupiter had said she must. Now she only had to trust her patron to do as he promised, to get her past the show trial and on to into the Wondrous Society. It sounded so easy in her head. The parade was ending just as they got back to Hawthorne's disappointment. He and Morgan had made their way through the dispersing crowd to find Feenstra, who was nowhere to be seen. "She's gonna murder us," groaned Morgan. "Come on, let's get to the Wonderground. Maybe she's looking for us there." "It's not our fault, is it?" said Hawthorne, picking up the pace. "I can't wait to tell my mom about the zombies. She'll be so jealous. I wonder if Cadence ever left the courtyard." "Who's Cadence?" "The girl who pushed me into the pond. That's her name, Cadence Blackburn." Morgan ducked as a bat swooped overhead, its last hurrah for Hallowmas. "I wonder if she ever jumped in. Probably still sitting there, the chicken." Hawthorne looked puzzled. "What are you talking about? What happened after I left? Did you see her jump in, or—" "See who jump in?" "Very funny, Hawth." Oh. A woman in a pumpkin costume knocked into Morgan and sent her sprawling to the ground, then hurried past without noticing. "Dear me, how rude," said a voice from above. "Are you all right? Let me help you." Morgan looked up, slightly dazed, to see a man in a gray overcoat with a silvery scarf wrapped around his neck and half his face. He made to reach out a gloved hand, but Hawthorne was already helping her up off the cobblestones. "I'm fine, thanks." "Oh, it's you," the man said, pulling off the scarf to reveal a familiar face and bemused smile. "Hello then, Miss Crow." "Mr. Jones, what are you doing back in Nevermore?" "Just visiting some old friends. They were in the parade. I thought I would lend my support." "I don't know if I trust this Mr. Jones fellow, by the way. I have some thoughts, and I keep them to myself, but I don't trust this guy." "I haven't seen you in the Hotel Decalion. Are you staying somewhere else?" Mr. Jones looked faintly surprised. "Goodness, no, I'd never stay anywhere but the Decalion. I'm afraid my employer couldn't spare me for long this time. I'm only here for the evening's festivities." "It's a long way to come for one night. You must really love the Black Parade." He chuckled. "I suppose I do." "Well, happy Hallowmas," she said, looking over his shoulders towards the Wonderground station, and thought she could see Fenn's fluffy gray ears poking out of the crowd. "We should go. It was nice, too. Are you here with your patron? No, this is my friend. This is Hawthorne. Mr. Jones turned to Hawthorne with an amiable nod, his eyes very slightly narrowed in appraisal. How do you do? Hawthorne glanced up at him distractedly. Thanks. You too. I'm good. Morgan, we gotta go. Fen will be mad. Right. Nice to see you again, Mr. Jones. Wait, I've been meaning to ask how your society trials are going. Good, actually. Morgan couldn't keep the surprise out of her voice. We finished one just now, the Fright Trial. And you made it through? Just, said Morgan, grinning. Suddenly she remembered the strange moment when she heard Mr. Jones's voice in her head as the hunt was closing in. Shadows are shadows, Miss Crow. Would it be weird to tell him? Congratulations, he returned her smile. 3 down, 1 to go. You should be proud. I presume you know by now what your knack is? Morgan's heart turned over. Her smile faltered, and she was about to admit that no, she actually hadn't when. Morgan, Hawthorne said pointedly, itching powder. You should go, Miss Crow. I think your friend is in a hurry. Good luck at the show trial. Mr. Jones tipped his hat. Both of you. To Morgan's great surprise, Fen waved off their hurried explanations and apologies with a careless flick of her tail. I know. Fright Trial, Jupiter said. You knew? Said Hawthorne. Of course I knew. Fen rolled her eyes. Why do you think I pretended to be distracted while you tiny reprobates scurried away? Now hurry up. If we miss the last train, you two are carrying me home. They were following Fen through the station's stuffy, unfathomable maze of stairways and tunnels when Hawthorne finally turned to Morgan and asked, Who is that weirdo in the gray coat? Mr. Jones. He's not a weirdo. He's nice. He asked 11 billion questions. I thought he'd never leave. How do you know him anyway? He offered me an apprenticeship on bid day. Hawthorne's eyes shot upward. You got 2 bids? I was excited to get 1. I got 4, said Morgan, her face turning scarlet. She hurried on, but 2 were fakes. It was a prank or something. Hawthorne's face grew thoughtful, and he was silent until they got to their platform. The 3 of them ran to the last train, leapt on board before the doors closed. Do you know what it is yet? He asked Morgan as they settled into the last 2 streets. Fenstra sat on her haunches nearby, giving the other passengers her trademark glower. What? She knew exactly what he meant. Your knack. It must be a really good one to get 4 bids. 2 bids, she corrected him, staring resolutely at her shoes, and it can't be that good if I don't even know what it is. They sat in silence through the remaining 7 stops. Although Morgan knew Hawthorne was dying to ask more questions. When they emerged to the cool night, he finally cracked. So, what school did the gray weirdo come from? He's not from a school. He's from a company called Squall Industries. Don't call him that. He wanted you for an apprenticeship, this Jones guy? No, it was his boss who bid on me, Ezra Squall. Ezra Squall? Where have I... Will you please stop dwindling? Fen shouted from nearly a block ahead of them. What were you whispering about there? Nothing, puffed Morgan, just as Hawthorne said, Ezra Squall. Ezra Squall? Fen nearly choked. Haven't heard those 2 words in a long time. How do you know the name Ezra Squall? How do you know Ezra Squall? Said Morgan. Is he a friend of yours? Fen looked deeply offended. Is that supposed to be funny? No, the evilest man who ever lived isn't a friend of mine. Thanks very much, she snapped. The evilest man who ever lived? Asked Morgan. What are you? Just shut up about Ezra Squall, will you? Feenstra said, lowering her voice and glancing around. She was more serious, more agitated than Morgan had ever seen her. It isn't funny to joke about being friends with the wundersmith, if anyone heard you. The wundersmith? Morgan stopped walking. Ezra Squall, the wundersmith? I said shut up about him. Fen stalked down Cassify Lane ahead of them, leaving Morgan and Hawthorne into stunned silence. Only when he reached Morgan's room and settled into bed, 2 hammocks tonight swinging side by side, did the 2 friends finally speak. It might be a different Squall, Morgan snorted. Yeah, I bet there are loads of Ezra Squalls around. They were quiet for several minutes then. I'm an idiot, said Morgan. Mr. Jones told me. He said Ezra Squall was the only person alive who knew how to control wonder. That's it, isn't it? That's what the wundersmith is? Suppose so. Of course I'm so stupid. Why does the evilest man who ever lived want me as his apprentice? Does he think I could be evil too? Now you're being stupid. You'd be hopeless at being evil. You don't have the stomach for it. I could be evil. My evil laugh is brilliant. Shut up. He broke off, sputtering. Oh, that one hurt my throat a little bit, actually. Hawthorne, shut up, Morgan snapped. Do you think I could be, what, evil? You're serious, aren't you? He leaned forward to look at her in the moonlight. No, Morgan. Of course you're not evil. Don't be ridiculous. It has to do with the curse. I know it does. They were right. Who? Everyone. My father, Ivy, the registry office for the cursed children. Everyone. The whole republic. I'm cursed, so maybe... But you told me Jupiter said the curse wasn't... Morgan wasn't listening. Maybe that makes me evil. You're not evil. Why does the evilest man who ever lived want me as his apprentice? Maybe Jupiter will know. Jupiter. So you think I could tell him? Well, yeah, of course, you should. It's the wundersmith. But I haven't even met him. Morgan protested. I've only met his assistant. You heard Dame Chander and Category. The Wonder himself can never come back to Nevermore. The city won't let him in. What if he finds a way, said Hawthorne. Morgan hated the growing dread on her friend's face. She hated that she was responsible for it. What if that's why Mr. Jones is here? This is serious, Morgan. I know it's serious, she said, swinging forward. Didn't you hear Fen? It's not funny to joke about being friends with the Wundersmith. What if Jupiter thinks I'm friends with Ezra Squall and doesn't want me to be his patron anymore? I don't know, said Morgan honestly. Jupiter had chosen her, rescued her, and defended her, even though she was cursed. But if he knew the evilest man who ever lived had chosen her too, would that be enough to change his mind? Morgan didn't want to find out. We can't let them kick you out. I won't let them, but we need a plan. How about this? If you see Mr. Jones again, we'll tell Jupiter everything. If not, we'll just wait until after the last trial, once we're both members of the Wondrous Society, and no one can possibly send you back to the Republic. Then we'll tell him, okay? Okay, said Morgan. She felt guilty about keeping such a big secret from Jupiter, and even worse about dragging Hawthorne into it, but it was extremely comfortable to hear her friend say we instead of you. She breathed deeply. Okay, fine. And until then, I won't tell a soul. Hawthorne stuck out his pinky finger, looking worried but determined, and Morgan hooked it with her own. Promise. All right, I'm curious what you guys think. Should they have kept that bit of information a secret, or should they tell somebody? We are getting closer to the end. We have this much left. So we are definitely more than halfway through, and oh my gosh, it's getting good. Okay, bye.